Well, hello, welcome back to Tail 3 Cabins and an RV. This is just a little supplemental video, a midweek video that I'm putting out. A couple weeks ago, I did a video when we first got the RV, and I answered 8 hard to find questions for when you first purchase an RV. And I briefly touched on the battery that the RV came with and a little bit about the solar power. And I told you in that video that I was probably going to upgrade to a lithium iron phosphate battery, and that's what I'm going to do today. And I'm just going to talk about my experience with installing this, some of the quirks that I found with this, and can anybody just install one of these in their RV. Now in the title I mentioned RVing for the rest of us, and I just want to cover a video that really covers a lot more of this when you see on YouTube than what's represented out there. A lot of the more popular RVing channels are much larger fifth wheels. They're sponsored by multiple corporations. They get a lot of free stuff, and it just puts their style of RVing out of the grasp of most of the other RVers out there. So I just want to keep my feet on the ground here and just show you what I'm doing as I go along, and hopefully that helps some of you out. So let's talk a little bit about the battery that comes with your RV when you first purchase one, or maybe you're buying a used one. Most cases it's going to come with a lead acid battery, and a lot of times it's not really distinguishable how many amp hours that battery can provide to your RV. If you do a little digging and look up the model number as I did, the one that came with my RV is rated for 64 amp hours, which is not very much. And considering that you should only use 50% of your lead acid battery, we're really only talking 32 amp hours. Now if you convert that into watts, that's 384 watts of usable power out of the battery that came with this RV. 384 watts is not going to get you too much when it comes to using it. So for example, the TV that came with this is a 40-inch LED, and it consumes about 70 watts per hour. So after 4 or 5 hours of TV viewing, that lead acid battery would be spent. You'd use its 50% up, and you really would want to go further than that, otherwise you're going to do damage to the battery. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to upgrade the battery right away. There's going to be times where we're probably not going to be hooked to electrical, and we're going to be spending overnight or 2 nights or maybe 3 nights. And the solar might provide a little bit of extra cushion for us, but that lead acid battery just wouldn't cut it if it was kind of cool out and we had to use the furnace. The furnace motor is going to use up wattage. The lights are going to use up wattage. If you want to charge your phone, that's going to use up wattage. And odds are, if we had a kind of a chilly night and had to spend it without any hook up to shore power, we'd probably have a dead battery in the morning. So there's a lot of options out there, but I'm going to just cut right to the lithium iron phosphate battery, and that's the most expensive, but to me that seems to be the most practical. There's a lot of them out there. They have come down in price over the years. Battleborn was always a popular premium battery, has safety features built into it, and that seemed to be the one of choice. But it was the one of choice, I think, because Battleborn got a lot of sponsors on different YouTube videos and offered them free batteries, and so that's why you see a lot of Battleborn out there. So there are a lot of manufacturers out there, and don't get me wrong, Battleborn is, I'm sure, a good battery, but it comes at a premium. I'm just getting my feet wet here when it comes to lithium iron, so I did want something that would give us 3 or 4 days off grid in the RV if we needed it, and that's without solar, that's without anything. So I went with a 200 amp hour Chins lithium iron phosphate battery. It's a little bit larger than the old battery, but it's not much heavier when it comes to weight. One thing you really want to consider when you're purchasing a battery is make sure you get the measurements of the battery, and odds are if you go to a 200 amp hour like this, it's not going to fit in the stock battery box that your RV came with. Mine did come with a dual battery box. It's 7 inches wide, about 22 inches long, and it's possible that if I would have got 2 separate 100 amp lithium iron phosphate batteries, those are a little bit smaller width-wise. Those might have fit in the existing battery box that came with my camper. This is about 21 inches long and about 9.5 inches wide. So I'm going to need a larger battery box than what came with my RV. And then one thing you really want to be careful with, because I purchased a battery box with this and it was a little too large, but I thought I could put some insulation in here and it would actually help regulate the battery's temperature a little bit better, especially in colder temperatures. I thought it would be helpful to have it a little bit larger, but then when it came to putting the box in between my propane tanks and the camper itself, the box was too big. It just was not going to fit. So I opted to get a smaller box. I'm going to have to do a few modifications here to get that box in and screwed down and secured. And then we'll drop the battery in, hook it up. And then I'm going to go over some quirks about this battery and a little bit more information about what this is going to do for us. So let's get the battery box in and everything hooked up, and I'll meet you back here in a little bit. The original battery box was drilled into the frame of the trailer via self-tapping screws. So I'm going to recycle those. I used some treated wood here on the bottom, and basically just going to use the same holes that was holding the old battery box. To attach the battery box to the treated wood, I'm going to use some rust-proof sheet metal screws that I had when I put my roof on. The packing material that came with the battery is going to fit perfectly inside this box. It'll cushion it and give it a nice tight seal, plus insulate it a little bit. To save on time, this probably took me a good minute or so to get it to slide in between the insulation and get a nice snug fit inside. I'll have to keep an eye on this when we're towing during rainy conditions to see just how weather tight it is. I might have to seal up the access holes for the wiring. So when I received the battery from Chin's, I ordered it through Amazon. I'll leave a link if you want to check it out. They make a couple various sizes, and this happens to be a smart battery, and what it means is that it has battery protection in there. It's got temperature sensors in there, so if the temperature dips below freezing, it will shut off its charging side of the battery, and that way it won't do any damage when the temperatures are low, won't allow it to take a charge. Temperature monitoring for discharge is much lower, so even though it's below freezing, the battery will still operate and discharge and run your stuff in the RV. It's just not going to charge up at that time. I opted to put the battery on the outside on the trailer, just like it came. Maybe in the future I might move it into the internal storage, which is right under our bunk here, and that way the battery might be a little bit warmer, but we'll see how it goes when we're out and about, how the temperatures affect it. I will talk about the quirkiness about this in a little bit, and it might be some helpful information if you decide to go this route. So the battery I chose is 200 amp hours, and right away compared to the lead acid battery that I have, it's going to give me 6 times more the capacity of power coming out of it compared to that one. Now 100 amp hours, I probably could have got away with 100 amp hours, and that would have gave me 3 times more. But I went with the 200 just in case in the future we're doing some extended stays out west. So the 200 amp hours should give us a good cushion of power before we would need to recharge it. And if the sun's out, well, that's all the better. That could extend our period of time that we're using. Another thing with 200 amp hours is this battery has the capability of discharging at 200 amp hours. So it could power a 2000 watt inverter. Now this RV comes with a 1000 watt inverter like most do. And 1000 watts is very helpful. It will power the TV and charge your devices and a few other smaller appliances, but it won't make a pot of coffee. It won't run the microwave. In the future, if we decided to swap out that 1000 watt inverter with the 2000 watt inverter, the cost would not be that great a deal to do that, and that would give us the capability of making a pot of coffee and also using a microwave for short periods of time. Now, if you're going to be using 2000 watts for longer periods of time than like 5 minutes at a pop, then you're probably going to have to do a heavy duty system. You're going to be looking at a 3000 watt inverter, and you're going to be looking at a large battery bank, which I just wanted to avoid. I wanted to do something that was simple. It was economical. It would provide us with a little bit more freedom in our decisions on where we were going to stay and what we were going to do in the future. And when I say RVing for the rest of us, You'll see some people that have some huge solar systems in their RVs. They have several panels up on the roof. They got a big battery bank in their storage area. They've got battery monitoring systems. They got a nice little panel on the wall that's telling them what power is coming in, what power is going out. And those setups are probably literally around $10,000 and maybe even more than that. For the average person at RVs, that's just not sustainable or possible to maintain a system like that, or maybe pay for it. So to me, this was a simple upgrade. They said basically that you could just drop it in. A few things I checked ahead of time is that my solar controller on the side wall there, I checked to make sure that that was lithium iron phosphate compatible, and it does have a setting to set it for lithium iron phosphate. So it's going to be able to charge that battery to a full capacity. So if you got your RV in the last couple of years, check the model numbers. You can go check your solar controller. It should have a lithium setting on there, and then check your panel. Usually it's located below the refrigerator. It has the breakers. So you'll see a little model number, fine print. You'll see the AD after the model number, which means automatic detection. So it automatically detects what type of battery that you have installed, and it will charge it appropriately. And if it's not compatible with one of these batteries, well then you could swap that out, and it's not too expensive. I think it was around 120 or 150 bucks just to change the converter. And I believe it's 4 wires. There are a lot of videos online if you want to change it. And you can buy a converter especially made for this battery so it will charge it 100% properly. If you don't have the proper converter, it's going to charge it, but it's probably only going to charge it to about 80% capacity. Now, another thing I liked about this battery is that it has an app. So I can go on my phone, and it hooks up through Bluetooth, and it'll tell me what the charge level is of the battery and what the state of the battery is. So it tells me the temperature, what the sensors are sensing, and if they're on or off, whether it's going to be discharging or charging. If those are off, if it's too cold, I can see that they're off. And that was another reason why I went with this battery, because that eliminated me having to get a separate battery monitoring system, which can be a couple $100 in itself, and a lot more wiring, take up a little bit more space. But essentially a battery monitor is going to be a couple $100. You're going to have to put a shunt in, some wiring, and then you can monitor your battery, and maybe you have to also calibrate it from time to time. Where this is all built into the battery right now, I can monitor the battery, see what the state of charge was. Like when I got it and I opened it up, it was at 8%. And then when I plugged it into the RV and hooked it all up, plugged into Shoreline, it took about 24 hours to top the battery off and charge it to 100%. So where does the quirkiness of this battery come in? Well, we had temperatures that dipped down to about 38 degrees overnight, and that was what the lowest it got. Temperatures started coming up in the morning around 42, 43. But I noticed that the sensors in the battery on the app itself were telling me, at least saying that the temperature of the battery was below 0 degrees centigrade. It was saying -2, -1. So Fahrenheit, if it's 38 degrees, that's a couple degrees above centigrade. So it was reading below freezing when it wasn't. Another thing this battery has is it has built-in heating pads. So when it's put on a charge and the temperature is below freezing, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to deny charging the battery, but divert that energy over to the heating pads. Once the temperature of the battery comes up, and I've seen it switch over at 5 degrees, but it says it needs to come up to 10 degrees Celsius. And then once that happens, it'll start diverting energy back into charging the battery. So that's a nice little safety feature too. And that's been in a lot of batteries previous to this. It's in the Battleborn batteries. But what I found is that it's reading colder than it actually is outside. We had overnight lows around 38 degrees, 40 degrees, and the temperature had come up to about 44. And I came out and the sun was out a little bit, and all my lights were kind of like flickering and flashing. And I noticed the solar controller on the wall was going crazy, and that was, light was coming on, coming off, the LCD was coming on, coming off, and it was just kind of flickering, and flickering fairly quickly, and I could not figure out what was going on. Well, what I determined is that the solar panels were trying to give the battery a charge, and the battery was denying that charge because it thought the temperature was below freezing. And I thought, well, how come the heating pads aren't kicking in? So I contacted Chins, and they said, well, the heating pads need 10 amps of power to kick in. and then they start heating up the battery. With the early morning sun, and I have some trees over here, the solar panels are only getting about 4 or 5 amps of power, trying to send it to that battery, and the battery's denying it. And it would switch off and on constantly, rapidly, and that's why my lights were flickering. And I don't know if that's healthy for the solar controller or not, but I wouldn't think so. I tried even just doing the battery disconnect, and it still did it. I ended up unplugging the solar panels on the roof temporarily until I kind of figured out what was going on, talked to Chins, and realized that if this happens, that you're going to need at least 10 amps to warm up that battery before it's going to take a charge, which is fine if you're in a campground and you can plug in somewhere, or if you have a generator and you can throw 10 amps at it through a generator through the shoreline. And it takes a little bit of time. The batteries do not warm up lickety-split. It takes a good hour, hour and a half before they come up to temperature and start charging. So that's a little bit of an inconvenience to me. I don't know how much this is going to come into play. Right now it's March and April here. This happened in March, and the temps, are staying fairly cool. But, if we're traveling more in the warmer months, this probably is not going to be an issue at all. In the national parks, maybe in the shoulder seasons, and we do wake up and the temperature is 20 and 30 degrees. Well, that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Probably going to have to bring our generator with us, at least to get the temperature of the battery back up, and then let solar take over and charge it the rest of the day. So that's my only gripe. It's a little bit of a quirk. I kind of wish that it might have been a little bit more accurate when it comes to sensing the temperature, but it is way off, or it does take a long time for the temperature to come up on this battery. For instance, it'll be 60 degrees and the battery will still be showing that it's like 2 or 3 Celsius. One other thing that I thought is that I thought the actual battery power itself would activate the heating pads and start heating up that battery on its own, but it will only do it when you are plugged into electric power, and it needs that necessary amperage to activate those heating pads. Now, it's probably going to take a little bit more of real world testing, because maybe if we are out somewhere and we're dry camping, we're not hooked to any shore power, and we're using stuff in the RV itself, we're using the lights. The battery itself, it just flickered right there. The battery itself might generate enough heat to start taking a charge. So if you are looking to upgrade to a lithium battery, you can just drop one in. If you just want to get started, stay economical, get the battery. You don't have to get the 200 amp one like I did. You can go with 100 amp. Pay attention to the dimensions of that battery. Make sure it's going to fit, or you might have to change your battery box. If I had to change one thing while I've been working with this, is I think I would have got a locking battery box instead of the battery box that I got. And I'll use it for a little while. I'm going to put a cable strap on it that locks and see how it goes. But a locking battery box might have been a better option for me. As long as it fits in between the propane tanks and the RV itself, you're good to go. So that's my experience so far with upgrading a battery. I hope some of this information helped you, or at least know where to delve into some more information. I'll leave some links below on the battery that I got, and also how you can look up your controllers and see exactly what you have. Maybe you are all prepared and ready to go. You can just drop that battery in. And maybe you can still drop that battery in, but you might have to make a few changes down the line. So I appreciate everybody watching. Hope you enjoy and subscribe to these videos. Hit that like button. Click on the little bell when you want to know when a new one's coming out. And keep an eye on us. Take care, everybody.